The River Thames is no stranger to swimmers of all shapes and sizes. In fact, King Henry III's pet polar bear was known to use the river as his own personal hunting grounds in the 11th century. But now something else appears to be stalking these waters. Take a look for yourself. London, England, March 2016. A passenger is enjoying a scenic ride in a cable car overlooking the fabled Thames River, when something in the water below catches his eye and he manages to capture this shaky but shocking footage.
Loading valley is where Michael Fallon just across the way.
The video is unsteady and unfocused, so let's slow it down and zoom in. It appears to show a dark shape as it surfaces momentarily and then dips back beneath the murky waters. For field researcher Ken Gerhardt, this might be proof of an impressive discovery.
The humps are characteristic of alleged sea monster accounts from around the world. So this could potentially be something unknown.
The video naturally went viral, with people comparing the creature to the Loch Ness Monster and another legendary creature.
The Lake Windermere monster, or Bow Nessie, is an aquatic creature that's been reported from Windermere Lake in northern England, which is one of the largest lakes in England. And sightings are fairly recent for the most part.
Gerhardt notes that all famous sea monsters seem to share some common traits. Could they also share a common ancestor?
All of our lake monsters worldwide seem to dwell in cold water lakes along the lines of latitude from 40 to 60 degrees north, and with the highest concentration along the latitude line of 50 degrees. And the physical descriptions are also very similar. Massive serpentine animals ranging anywhere from 15 to 30 feet across.
Field researcher Cliff Barrickman says there's an even stranger possibility that stems from urban myths dating all the way back to the Victorian era.
There is a theory that what people are seeing is actually some sort of escaped crocodile or an alligator. People have reported seeing swans sucked from the top of the water and dragged underneath to their deaths. What's doing that? Maybe it is one of these escaped alligators or crocodiles or something like that.
For Gerhardt, though, the possibilities are quite limited. Sea monsters, as he said, or something equally big.
We could be dealing with some type of whale that strayed out of the ocean and came into fresh water. And in fact, this behavior has been documented before.
50 years ago, the Thames was so polluted it was considered to be biologically extinct. Since then, new protections have been put in place to restore the river, and the wildlife has returned. Could this be nature healing itself with a vengeance? Let's see what our experts have to say. When our marine biologist, Dr. Shay Conger, analyzes the video, she has her doubts about one popular online theory making the rounds.
Some people have speculated that this could be a submarine temporarily coming above the surface of the water. This doesn't look like a submarine to me because we don't see anything like a periscope. Rather, it's just kind of ambiguous humps.
Now, Dr. Conger has told us before that pollution could lead to strange mutations, but she doubts that this is some kind of giant mutant croc.
Crocodiles or alligators are exothermic animals that are adapted to warm environments. And the Thames is a fairly cold water estuary, and they would have a really hard time surviving here.
So what about a wayward whale? It wouldn't be the first time. A young minke whale was actually spotted in the Thames as recently as 2021.
If I had to guess, this looks something like a whale or other very large creature. The size of this object does fall within several large whale species. And in fact, humpback whales have been discovered in the Thames. And there's also been other species of whales that have been found here, including bottlenose whales.
Wildlife biologist Dr. Stephanie Shuttler respectfully disagrees. She thinks there's something fishy about the video.
It doesn't look like any sort of sea animal. It has these points emerging from the water. Whales and dolphins are really smooth, and it doesn't seem to be moving like an animal. We're not seeing it shift at all, and we see this dark shadow, but again, that's not moving at all. The other suspicious thing is when we see the so-called animal start to submerge, we don't see that dark spot disappear. So I think what we're seeing is just something added I think this is some sort of altered video.
So yes, this could be a hoax, but based on Dr. Conger's analysis, we're going to call this one an unidentified creature. I, for one, am calling this just another reason I'll never be taking a dip in an English river. February 2022, Sakon, Nakhon, Thailand. A local man is on a Saturday stroll in his neighborhood when he sees something strange moving slowly in some dirty runoff. Knowing no one would believe him without proof, he reaches out to the creature with a jar and captures this. A long, tubular creature sits in some shallow water at the bottom of a barrel. It's about 2 feet long and it sure appears serpentine, but it's covered in what looks like an odd greenish fur. Let's watch that again. It rears its head and pokes a pair of tiny nostrils above the surface, and the tongue flicks out suddenly. Field researcher Ken Gerhardt fills us in on what the internet made of this fuzzy creature.
One theory is that we may be looking at an example of a real, genuine dragon. Many of our dragons in mythologies around the world are chimeras. That is, they combine different features from different types of animals. For example, a serpentine or reptilian body shape, but often adorned with mammal-like features like claws or hair, a beard, sometimes wings.
But aren't dragons usually bigger? This creature looks relatively small.
We have a type of dragon known as the basilisk, or the little king, which is a very tiny type of dragon that comes out of the Middle East. One could make an argument that this is representative of one of these small dragon stories.
One of the most compelling things about dragons is that they've been documented in mythologies around the world. It's hypothesized this may be because all cultures feared snakes. But some say this collective consciousness about dragons indicates our ancestors all actually encountered the same fantastic creatures. Let's turn to our experts for their thoughts on the reality of this serpentine beast. First, we turn to our veteran forensic analyst, Michael Primo, to determine whether this creature is real or just a clever digital mock-up.
Through physical aspects of the scene analysis, lens flaring from the camera, as well as lighting that was produced from behind the camera, the verdict is that this is an authentic video.
An authentic furry serpent? If we're gonna go there, let's talk about chimeras. They don't all have to be dragons, and in fact, there are some examples of chimeras in nature. We have the narwhal, the famed sea unicorn, a whale with a tusk reaching up to 10 feet in length. Some of these creatures are so unbelievable that even scientists doubted their existence. Take the duck-billed platypus, for example. Initially, 19th century naturalists were sure that specimens sent from Australia to Great Britain were hoaxed. Could this be, like the platypus, something entirely new? Marine biologist Shay Conger weighs in.
To me, this looks like a type of snake. You can see that it's flicking its tongue in and out, and that's one of the main ways that snakes sense their environment is by essentially tasting the air or testing the chemicals in the water around it to see if there's food or danger. But there's something unusual going on to where it's coated in this green fibrous material. Snakes, because they're reptiles, don't have fur.
Conger says mammals need fur to keep them warm, but reptiles don't.
Reptiles actually use the heat of the environment around them to warm their bodies.
We turn next to wildlife biologist Stephanie Shuttler. If it's not fur, what is it?
It really looks to me to be more plant-like.
Sounds wild, but animals with vegetation growing on them are more common than you think.
There are turtles that get algae on them and other snake species that get algae on them. Sloths have algae throughout their fur. Polar bears, when it's warmer, their fur will also turn a greenish color from the algae. But the really remarkable thing is that this snake is pretty much entirely covered.
So how, and more importantly, why did this happen?
The snake had to be moving very slowly because the plant spores need to embed themselves into the skin to grow onto it. It protects them, predators can't see them, and it helps them catch more prey because the prey can't see them as well. It also makes them smell like the environment. They're essentially carrying the environment on them. It could be that this snake intentionally let the algae grow on it as a survival strategy.
Our verdict? algal growth. This is one of those rare stories where the truth is just as fascinating as any legend. According to locals, this is a puffed-faced water snake. The next time it sheds, the algae will go with it, and a new bloom will need to take root on his body. September 2020. Jeannie Wilson of Taylorsville, North Carolina, is cleaning up after game night with family and friends. She heads into her sunroom where she comes across a modern-day monster. She records this video of a foot-long snake slithering around the bottom of a 5-gallon container with 2 heads. Based on the video, the snake's heads appear to be working independently of each other. Jeannie was nearly shocked out of her skin.
I spotted him in the corner of the sunroom. I thought somebody had stepped on his head and mashed it. And I looked really close and I said, "You've got 2 heads," and it's like, wow, for a 2-headed snake to make it that long out in the wild is amazing.
Field researcher Cliff Barrickman believes that animals like this 2-headed serpent may have been the original inspiration for many of the world's most fearsome mythical monsters.
Probably the only thing scarier than a snake might be a 2-headed snake. If we look back into ancient times, you can find stories of multi-headed animals, like the multi-headed dog Carabas that guarded the gates of hell, or the Hydra, the many-headed snake monster. And I think that behind these sorts of stories is always a grain of truth.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt lays out a more sinister idea. Warning, these images could be disturbing.
I'm thinking of a Russian scientist who is able to successfully attach the head of a dog to another dog.
That would be Dr. Vladimir Demikhov, a pioneering Russian surgeon who transplanted one dog's head onto the neck of another dog back in 1968. The conjoined animals survived for 38 days.
So we can't rule out the possibility that this 2-headed snake could be the result of a similar type of experimentation.
Sadly, about 3/4 of all conjoined twins die before, during, or soon after birth. So how did the snake get this way, and how did it survive? Is this fantastic beast unnaturally lucky, or is it a bit too fantastic? First, we brought the video to Roxy Furman to assess the authenticity.
I've seen conjoined twins before of various different other species, but my initial instinct was, is this head real or not? And up until kind of halfway through, this second head is not kind of using its tongue to smell the environment. But then there was a point where the second head, its tongue comes out, and at this point you can see it's kind of wanting to move in a different direction, which then made me think this is real.
Furman says these 2-headed creatures are examples of a natural but mysterious mutation called polycephaly.
There's a lot that we still don't understand about conjoined twins. If there are 2 heads, both which have their own consciousness, then who kind of overrides the control of the body, or whether they communicate with one another as 2 individuals would.
Furman refutes the idea that this multi-headed snake could be the product of human experimentation, similar to that of Soviet scientists in the 1950s.
There's no indication of recent surgery, there's no stitches or suture marks.
So it's a real, natural-born snake. But what explains its mutation and its survival?
It seems to be doing pretty well. This is unique because we don't often see animals with 2 heads that seem to be healthy, because they don't tend to survive in the wild.
And while Conger is positive the snake isn't some bizarre experiment, she says the genetic mutation we see here may still have been caused by humans, just not intentionally.
Amphibians and reptiles, like snakes, are actually just really prone to mutation. And a lot of this has to do with environmental pollution. It's been shown that there's a number of pollutants that can actually cause malformations in wildlife, and we're seeing this increasingly today.
So, our verdict. This snake was an example of polycephaly, quite possibly caused by pollution. What became of it is this story's happy ending. Jeannie gave the snake to a friend, and here's his update. He says he named the serpent Double Trouble, and says he's alive and well.
When Double Trouble was found, he was already a few months old, so he had a good start. He's approaching a year old, and he's never refused a meal. He's just been thriving, and that's the sign that he's gonna make it and possibly live to adulthood. I always wanted a two-headed snake, so it was kind of like a dream come true, and I've loved working with him ever since.
It's March 2020, a hot and humid day in the Brazilian Amazon. Local fishermen are crossing the Xingu River when they encounter an extraordinary sight. At first, it almost looks like waves or ripples, but let's have a closer look. It's some kind of gigantic snake. This thing is nightmarish, and by one estimate, it's 50 feet long. Field researcher Ken Gerhardt says it immediately reminds him of the legendary river serpent known as Boyuna, a gigantic mythical deity of South America.
It's described as being an enormous black snake or serpent, and it's considered to be a guardian of sorts, that it actually stands guard at certain sacred places.
But huge snakes aren't just part of folklore. They're actually part of the Amazonian fossil record. This is the prehistoric predator Titanoboa, which measured more than 40 feet long. Its midsection as wide as a man's waist. It weighed over a ton and could stay underwater for as long as 45 minutes.
This thing did in fact exist, and in this kind of habitat. Who's to say that they're all gone?
The fossil record shows that Titanoboa went extinct millions of years ago, but field researcher Cliff Barrickman notes that sometimes allegedly extinct species turn up alive and well. Example, the famous coelacanth fish.
The coelacanth fish was thought to be extinct for millions of years, like 20 million years, until it was discovered in the 1930s, swimming around in the oceans off of Indonesia. So we should expect to be discovering animals that were either thought to be extinct or are related to extinct animals.
Wow. Is the creature in the video some kind of relic species, some extremely large cousin of the Titanoboa that somehow survived? And when the Amazonian tribespeople described Boyuna, the serpent river god, could they really have been talking about something real? We turn to our experts.
I mean, this is extraordinary.
Wildlife biologist Lucy Eckersley finds the video remarkable.
It could be that this snake is a living relic of Titanoboa, something that could trace its lineage back to that enormous animal.
But she thinks the serpent might be too big to be believed.
I think that this is an incredible sighting of an enormous snake. I think that this video has been stretched and manipulated to make it look even more enormous than it really was.
So we head back to forensic video analyst Michael Primo to authenticate the footage.
This video has left me baffled. We have a rippling effect that's consistent with the movements of the snake, which is a level of consistency that would be incredibly difficult to manufacture. If it has been changed, it's been changed to a minimal degree.
So, could it be a relative of Titanoboa? Marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger says that even if the video is totally legit, the creature's distended midsection is key evidence.
It appears to have consumed a very large prey, possibly a capybara or some type of ungulate. From what we know about the Titanoboa, they primarily consume fish.
Based on that dietary profile, Conger concludes this is a giant anaconda. But interestingly, she is not prepared to dismiss the notion that it could still be the god Boyuna.
The people that inhabit this area have spent centuries living around these animals. The division between the deity and the biological creature are not two different things. So to deny the fact that this animal may embody a regional deity or religious icon is outside the scope of what science should do.
So with that guidance in mind, our verdict, this is a giant anaconda. And whether you want to call it a predator, a deity, or some combination of both depends on how close you live to it. With a length of nearly 4,000 miles, the Yangtze is the third longest river in the world. Its waters are home to several unique aquatic species. But in September 2019, a viral video captures an image of something unprecedented. Taken from a ferry dock, the video captures what looks like a mysterious creature slithering along the surface of the water. You can't see a head, but that sure looks like a powerful tail. and eyeballing its size relative to its distance from the dock and the height of this man observing the scene, it appears to be at least 10 feet long. Once the video goes viral, it racks up tens of millions of views, and a new legend is born.
People dubbed the creature the Three Gorges water monster. Some have speculated that this creature could actually be a giant water snake or eel of some kind that has mutated and become huge thanks to pollution.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt has extensively studied many of the legendary beasts said to inhabit the waterways of China.
In this part of the world, there are legends of mythical serpent-like creatures. You have the dragons known as the Lung, which are described as huge and serpentine and scaly, with 4 stubby limbs, each with 5 claws. There's also the Naga, described as dark and serpentine, up to 40 feet in length.
So what is this mysterious object slithering through the water? It doesn't seem to be tied to anything towing it along. What does that mean? Let's check with our experts. First, we take the video to our marine biologist, Dr. Shay Conger.
What we see in this video is what appears to be a pretty large animal that appears to have some sort of a tail that's moving back and forth.
Dr. Conger's first guess is that this might be some kind of large eel, but the largest known eel, coincidentally called the European conger, has never been sighted in these waters.
I don't think there's species of eel that are as large as this in the area.
Conger says when it comes to endemic Yangtze River creatures, there are plenty of cool candidates.
One of the unique animals to the area is the giant salamander. It can get up to 6 feet long and weigh over 100 pounds. But I don't think this is a giant salamander because it has a lot of irregularities on the top of it. And if this were a type of salamander, we would expect this would be kind of a smooth animal with a smoother, longer tail moving through the water.
Dr. Conger wonders if this might be the elusive Chinese sturgeon, which can reach lengths of 16 feet.
They evolved over 100 million years ago, so they're, in essence, living prehistoric animals. However, sturgeon have really defined tail fins that would be sticking above the surface of the water. And because I don't see that type of fin or tail, I can conclude this probably isn't a sturgeon.
So could it just be a hoax? We ask our resident video forensic expert, Michael Primo.
I don't see any major splicing that took place throughout this object as it's swimming, if you will. I do not believe that this recording has been doctored or manipulated with malicious intent.
But Primo digs deeper and finds a telltale sign that things may not be as they seem.
When we look at the ripples as this object is traveling through the water, there is no definitive pattern as it's traveling through the water that we would expect to see from something that we know is like a fish or a shark. There are some unnatural behaviors. Upon further investigation, we came across this recording that is allegedly a dark-colored rubber airbag.
Primo suggests that's not a tail propelling a creature through the water, just a strong Yangtze current moving one end of the big airbag back and forth.
So it is possible that this is what we were actually seeing in the river, and it wasn't actually some sort of river monster.
So, about the theory that the Yangtze River monster was created by pollution. Turns out that's true. But it's not an overgrown snake. It's a long black rubber industrial airbag, likely discarded by a nearby shipyard. But still, there is a lesson here. More and more of the Yangtze's unique aquatic life is going extinct due to pollution and overfishing. In October 2017, a man is about to step into his sister's bathroom in Alor Setar, Malaysia, when he notices something crawling out of the toilet. The 28-year-old immediately rushes out to tell his sister, who whips out her camera and captures this video. The footage shows a strange, slithering creature emerging from the bathroom with its head poking out of the door. It surveys its surroundings before finally crawling out onto the tiled floor. Let's take another look. The creature appears to be about 6 feet long, with a small head, thick body, and a short tail. Field researcher Ken Gerhardt has studied river monsters, lake monsters, and now sewer monsters.
It's large, it's slimy and black. It's crawling out of a toilet. That's about as bad as it gets. People don't generally spend a lot of time, if any time, in a sewer. So we really don't have any idea of what types of creepy crawlies might be down there.
Gerhard says the most persistent urban legend involves the sewers of the Big Apple.
There are accounts and rumors going back to the 1930s that describe sizable alligators actually living and breeding in the New York sewer system. There is one theory that perhaps these were pets that were somehow discarded and flushed down the toilet when they were small and then grew to massive sizes in the sewer.
Of course, not all sewer animals are monsters. Sometimes animals just get stuck in the sewers, trapped by size or circumstance. And everything from giant rats, feral cats, even cows, have been found in sewer systems around the world. And marine biologist Dr. Sheikh Conger says in Southeast Asia, giant snakes turn up down there too.
It's a really tropical, forested environment. In fact, it's been known that there have been snakes that have emerged from toilets or plumbing.
In fact, in 2019, this 14-foot cobra was found in a sewer in Thailand. Sewer creatures have been making headlines for decades, but it is rare to encounter anything this big and this disturbing. So could this be a giant snake? Or maybe just some form of camera trickery? Let's go to our video expert.
This recording has been compressed pretty heavily, so in layman's terms, it's too blurry to see anything to be able to identify exactly what we're seeing. However, in terms of authenticity of the way that the recording is playing and the way that the camera operator is capturing this object, I don't see anything to suggest it's been CGI'd or Photoshopped.
So if the video is real, is this thing a snake? Dr. Conger says we need to consider other slimy creatures known to slither across this part of the world.
Malaysia is home to amphibians that we call caecilians. And these are salamander-like animals that don't have limbs or any external appendages, so they look a bit like giant worms. These animals can actually get 5 to 6 feet long, but what you have in essence is an animal that's only a few inches in diameter. And so my idea that this could be some sort of caecilian goes out the window.
Conger has another thought that's even grosser.
Malaysia is pretty well known for its leeches, which are blood-sucking invertebrates. But if this were a leech, it would have to be 30 or 40 times bigger than a known species of leech, which I think is really unlikely.
Professor Floyd Hayes, who has been fascinated with snakes since childhood, is pretty sure he knows what we're looking at. And it's not some sort of mythical serpent.
There are quite a few different species of snakes in Malaysia. This one appears to be very thick-bodied, and there's not that many species that would look like this. It looks a lot like the elephant trunk snake.
Hayes says that the baggy skin, which gives the impression that it's too big for the animal, is the telltale sign. So our verdict? Based on its known habitat and size, we think the sewer monster is an elephant trunk snake. And while they usually make their homes near rivers and lagoons, this one chose a toilet instead. No accounting for taste. The Kraken is perhaps the largest legendary monster known to man. In Nordic folklore, it was said to stalk the seas from Norway all the way to Greenland. Now, none of the legends ever mention how the Kraken gives birth, but maybe this next video can provide the proof. In October 2019, a team of divers sets off to explore a sunken World War II ship off the Norwegian coast. Instead, they see this. The footage shows the team in a close encounter with a huge, drifting, gelatinous blob. The video is played all over the world, and it's not lost on people that these are the exact waters the dreaded legendary sea monster called the Kraken was known to inhabit. Look at it up close. The giant floating orb is as big as a person, and when the divers turn their flashlights on it, it appears as if the sphere is filled with hundreds of thousands of tiny creatures. Also inside is an orange mass. Some speculate that this is a tentacle. Captain Nils Bodne says he's never seen anything like it in 25 years at sea.
We didn't know what it was, and as we were swimming closer, it was actually bigger and bigger. It was like an alien thing in the water.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt speculates whether this orb could actually be the spawn of the Kraken.
So the legend of the Kraken is probably one of the most celebrated sea monsters of all time. Based on its physical descriptions, the multiple arms, the massive size, and just the reputation for being very malevolent and snatching sailors off of ships.
Legends say that the Kraken could devour a ship's entire crew at once. But despite its fearsome reputation, the monster also seemingly had its benefits. It allegedly swam accompanied by huge schools of fish. Brave fishermen could risk going near the beast to secure a bountiful catch. Unfortunately, Captain Bodna said his team didn't have much air left in their scuba tanks, so they could only document this encounter for a few minutes. But our experts had plenty of time. Let's see what they have to say. Our video forensics expert, Michael Primo, examines the footage to determine if it's too good to be real.
The way that the light bounces off and through this object helped us to authenticate this frame by frame. So at this spot, we can see, again, translucent behavior of the subject behind the object and then some sort of shadowing from his reflection. So I'm leaning more toward that this object was real.
So if it's not a hoax, what is it? Marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger weighs in.
It could be jelly or cnidarian, which is a stinging animal. However, sea jellies have really distinct organelles and stinging cells and anatomies. This doesn't have any really defined and clear organs.
But apparently there are other deep-sea organisms that look like gelatinous blobs.
Maybe it's some really large form of a hooded nudibranch.
Conger says nudibranchs are sea slugs that secrete a sweet smell, often compared to watermelon, for defense purposes. But they are typically only about 4 inches long. So if it's too blobby to be a jellyfish and too large to be a nudibranch, what's left? Could it be an embryo from the legendary Kraken? Maybe, in a way. The Kraken was an exaggerated version of an animal we now know to be real.
We really can attribute historical sightings of the Kraken to known squid species today, like the giant and colossal squid. I wouldn't say it's out of the frame of possibility.
In fact, we've seen live and dead versions of both species dating back to 1853. And it's believed they can grow to nearly 60 feet. So maybe it is a Kraken egg. But not so fast. After a DNA analysis of the mass, scientists are issuing a new opinion.
It was determined that this was actually the egg casing of a short-finned squid. That's really cool because this object appears to be extremely large, but in reality, it was the egg case of an animal that's only about 1 foot long. So it's possible that such a small organism can lay such a huge egg casing because it's just full of water.
The lesson here is that in the ocean, small things can come in large packages. So our verdict? This is the egg sac of a short-finned squid. But what about that orangey mass in the center? Scientists believe it's probably ink from the female squid who injected it while making the sphere. It's March 21st, 2022, Maroochydore Beach, 60 miles outside of Brisbane, Australia. Alex Tan is strolling along the coast when he stumbles across something unusual. He takes out his camera and records this.
I honestly don't know what it is.
An odd-looking creature, which appears to be deceased, lying in the sand. Let's take a closer look. It sure doesn't look like it came from the sea. More like something out of an H.G. Wells novel with its dog-like body and rodent-like head.
So I'm trying to figure out what it was, and it had the color of, like a chicken nugget. It was just weird. It really just threw me off. I was just so fascinated at what I'd found.
Author and journalist Aaron McCarthy says that when the video first went viral, thousands of social media users suggested this could be a bunyip. Sure, it could, but what's a bunyip?
A bunyip, which is actually a creature from Indigenous Australian folklore that, it's said, loves to eat people, specifically women and children. It's a creature that lives in waterholes, lakes, and rivers around Australia. It's been said to look like a seal or sometimes a swimming dog. The word bunyip actually first appeared in print in the 1840s when some discovered fossils that were theorized to be a bunyip. There was actually what was said to be a bunyip skull displayed in the Australian Museum in Sydney for a couple of days in the 1840s.
McCarthy also wonders if this creature's odd appearance could be explained by some sort of mutation caused by nuclear testing.
Some have actually speculated that this creature is a mutated wallaby. Between the early 1950s and the early 1960s, the British government performed nuclear tests at 3 sites across Australia: Emu Island, Maralinga, and the Montebello Islands. There were 12 major tests performed at these sites, and some of the weapons that were detonated were actually as big as the bombs used during Hiroshima. Those particles have caused a lot of problems for the wildlife that live in those areas.
One other thought. There's also a biosecurity sciences lab located in nearby Brisbane. Could this thing have been the subject of some secret medical experiment and somehow gotten loose? This show is no stranger to odd beach carcasses. One of our first segments focused on this strange creature found in South Carolina. Some said it had escaped from a nearby off-limits island where thousands of monkeys are bred for research. Could something similar have happened here? Or perhaps this is the legendary bunyip, or some new undiscovered species from Australia's vast outback. Let's let our experts see what's up down under. We begin with forensic video analyst Michael Primo to see if this video could have been altered.
We were able to confirm that these 4 recordings came from an Apple iPhone. There were no programs that interacted with these files and changed the evidence in any way digitally.
If the video hasn't been altered, what could we be seeing here? We turn to marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger to test the popular online theory that this is a bunyip.
It looks like a mammal to me, but there's not a lot of definable features. The bunyip is said to be kind of an aquatic animal, and what I see here looks to be a really typical quadrupedal animal. So I think because of this fact, it's very unlikely to say that this is a bunyip.
But if it's not a bunyip, what could it be? Wildlife biologist Stephanie Shuttler takes a look to see if this could be the result of radioactive experiments in the area.
Radiation can damage DNA cells, and anytime there is damage to DNA during replication process, this creates mutations. Usually from radiation, the DNA makes mistakes in replication and just keeps replicating cells, and they're tumor cells.
Damage caused by radiation, like in the Chernobyl disaster, usually leads to side effects like cancer or radiation sickness, which can cause hair loss. But Shuttler has another theory that explains why this creature is hairless.
You can tell the tide is going down, so it's very likely that this creature has been in the water for a long time, in the ocean, and when they're exposed to the ocean water and the sun's rays, it can cause the fur to come off as part of the decomposition process.
So what about the wallaby theory, a creature known to be widespread down under?
Wallabies are similar to kangaroos, but I don't see evidence that it's a wallaby. If it were a wallaby, you would have more powerful hind legs. They would be longer in comparison to the forearms. And in this case, they seem to be pretty equal. It looks more like an animal that walks on all 4s rather than hops like a wallaby would.
So if it's not a wallaby, what are we looking at here?
Australia has lots of possum species. I think it's the brush-tailed possum. The limbs are similar in length. Opossums have naked tails. They don't really have any fur in their tails.
Our verdict? This is a brush-tailed possum in the stages of decomposition. It's missing its hair because it's been in the ocean. And the head looks strange because predators will often chew the skin off a possum's head and leave the skull. 2019, on a fishing boat in the North Atlantic, fishermen catch something in their nets. But rather than releasing their find, the seamen document something truly astounding. A large fish head, reminiscent of the creature from the Black Lagoon, has been separated from its body. It looks slimy to the touch, with huge unblinking eyes and a gaping maw. A gloved hand holds the head at the base while another holds a can of soda. It's placed into the mouth of the beast with shocking results. Despite being fully decapitated, the creature bites into the can with a fury, seemingly effortlessly crushing it in its jaws. Field researcher Ken Gerhard wonders if this could be some sort of naturally zombified sea creature.
So in the animal kingdom, there is a process that's been documented known as cryptobiosis, whereby certain types of marine life have actually been reanimated or brought back to life. Sea monkeys, of course, were tiny brine shrimp that had essentially been dried out, desiccated, that were, for all intents and purposes, dead. But people could reanimate them by introducing seawater.
Gerhard is also reminded of a phenomenon among humans called lucid decapitation, wherein the severed head of a person continues to exhibit lifelike qualities.
There have been many examples, particularly during the French Revolution. They had the famous device known as the guillotine, which was efficiently designed to chop off people's heads. And there are many stories of disembodied heads that seem to be animated and alive, sometimes minutes after the decapitation.
In one famous example in 1905, a French surgeon convinced an inmate sentenced to death to blink as much as he could after the beheading.
Once this decapitation occurred, he actually called out the inmate's name, and he claims that this beheaded head actually looked at him as if it recognized its name. So when we consider these cases of lucid decapitation, we certainly could ask, is that what we're seeing here, an example of this particular phenomenon?
Fortunately, we don't decapitate people these days, so there's not much recent data to study regarding headless humans. But there seems to be ample evidence of some kind of life after death, at least physical activity, if not consciousness. This biting fish head is a fascinating specimen. Let's see what our experts make of it. Wildlife biologist Stephanie Schuttler addresses our zombie concerns.
There's no cases in nature of back from the dead zombification, but there are things in nature that happen that resembles zombie behavior.
In fact, it's more common than you'd think. Tropically transmitted parasites like Euaplorchus californiensis hijack their hosts' nervous systems, turning these fish into zombies so the parasites can hop from one host to another.
It changes their brain chemistry to make them want to go to the surface of the water where it's dangerous and flash around so that they get noticed by predators, specifically birds, and get eaten up.
But Schuttler doubts that's what's happening.
I don't think what we're seeing here is due to parasites because the parasite is not benefiting at all. The fish being dead doesn't help the parasite at all.
So could this instead be an example of lucid decapitation? Marine biologist Shay Conger weighs in.
When an animal dies like this, there's a number of things still going on that don't immediately stop. And one of those is blood flow. So blood carries oxygen to different tissues of the body for some period of time. The brain is really reliant upon oxygen to function.
Because this is a sea creature, we can assume it's cold-blooded, which means it requires less oxygen than mammals. So a bodiless fish can continue to use up that remaining oxygen for a longer period of time.
In the case of animals that are recently deceased, there is something called a cadaveric spasm, which is when you still have some electrical potential in your nerve cells, meaning that there's still some kind of ionic charge between the nerves that can fire back and forth. What I see here is a typical face of a mature Whelf eel. They have very strong jaws, and what's happening is that nerves are just being triggered. This doesn't mean that the animal's alive.
This phenomenon has been caught on camera numerous times. So while we're looking at a fish, it's not a fluke. Our verdict? This is a decapitated wolf eel displaying some kind of muscle spasm. A natural occurrence, if you can believe it, albeit a disturbing one. This is the Barents Sea, located between Russia and the North Pole. It's one of the most remote and unexplored places on Earth. And one deep-sea fisherman there has brought creatures to the surface that are so bizarre, his Instagram account has made headlines. Fish with bulging lips, what looks like human dentures, and fluorescent red-colored eyes. Creatures with heads shaped like aliens. The images are so bizarre, and there are so many of them. Journalist MJ Banayas, who covers the unexplained, says it's made people wonder if there's something unnatural going on below.
These creatures look so bizarre that people naturally question something's wrong. One theory is that these aren't natural animals, but rather the product of some sort of bizarre mutation.
Look again for yourself. Mutation seems like a reasonable explanation for this. And it turns out the idea of mutated Russian fish may not be far-fetched, as our military expert Tim McMillan explains.
Any government that has any kind of nuclear proliferation program has always had this problem of how do you get rid of your waste? And for a number of years, the Soviet Union's answer was dumping it into the Barents Sea. 17,000 nuclear containers, multiple different nuclear-powered ships were sunk, and an entire nuclear submarine. From a period of about the 1950s until the collapse of the Soviet Union.
Whoa. So the Soviets used the Barents Sea as a nuclear toilet bowl for decades. And as our physicist, Dr. Hakeem Oluseyi explains, radiation and DNA don't mix.
Radiation is really tiny subatomic particles that are flying along. And when they encounter a DNA molecule, they can strike it and break it and change it. So when DNA is subject to radiation, then what happens is the instructions for writing a new animal are changed. So you could end up with anything virtually.
A recent scientific study found that a Soviet nuclear submarine at the bottom of the Barents Sea was nearly 1 million times more radioactive than previously estimated. So are these freaky fish the result of all that dumping? Our marine biologist, Dr. Shay Conger, looks for answers. Conger looks first at the fish's shape and scales.
If these fish were impacted by radiation, we would expect to see strange bumps or protrusions on different parts of the body. But I don't see any signs of radiation sickness or poisoning throughout this animal. Its epidermal tissue actually seems to be pretty intact.
Okay, so Conger says these fish aren't the victims of a nuclear waste dump. But then what else could explain some of these bizarre features? Conger has a theory.
They undergo a process of what we call barometric trauma.
It turns out that some of these fish have the bends. When human divers come up too quickly from the deep, the change in pressure causes the gases in their body to expand. Well, same for fish.
Often these fish will come to the surface with their stomach sticking out of their mouth because of the extreme pressure of having the gases within their body tissues expand at such a quick rate.
But there's got to be more to this fish story, right? Conger says the real story was millions of years in the making.
Each species on Earth has a very predictable and well-defined evolutionary pathway that makes it what it is today. These animals aren't alien, they're just adapted to an extremely different environment than we're used to.
The jury is still out about the long-term effects this contamination will have on marine species. Dr. Conger cautions that the impact could take decades to be fully felt. For us, natural evolution and the bends explain these weird-looking fish. So our verdict? This is a non-nuclear phenomenon. It's May 2017 in Indonesia's Maluku province. Locals are heading out to work when they make a gigantic, gruesome discovery floating in the water. Cell phone video shows them examining the rotting corpse of a 50-foot dead sea creature that has somehow washed ashore. Here's a look from another angle. The formless blob is not only immense, it looks like it's coated in some sort of white, shaggy hair. What kind of animal has hair like that?
It seems like it's something that shouldn't exist. And in fact, if this animal were terrestrial, it wouldn't be able to exist because of its sheer body mass.
Folklore is chock full of legendary sea creatures as big as this carcass. The ancient Hebrew Leviathan, the Jormungandr of Norse mythology, and the Kraken, a kind of giant octopus, so big it was described as a floating island in Viking eyewitness accounts.
Oh man, I bet that stinks there.
But field researcher Cliff Barrickman says these carcasses have their own name.
Globsters. Globsters are cool in every way.
It's part blob, it's part glob, it's part lobster. I mean, how awesome is that?
Globsters have been turning up on shores around the globe for years. This one, known as the Cherbourg carcass, was discovered in France in 1934. But what to make of this one? Globsters have also washed up on beaches in Florida, New Zealand, Bermuda, Canada, and South Africa. But they've never been spotted in the water alive. So what exactly are we looking at here? Let's turn to our analysts. Wildlife biologist Lucy Eckersley first focuses on that amorphous mass of tissue.
I think these could be mistaken for lots of different sea animals, and because they look kind of squishy, you might think that they look like a giant octopus or a giant squid.
A giant squid? But look.
We can see some exposed bone.
This video clearly shows this creature has a spine, so it can't be an invertebrate. Next question, what to make of that hair?
What looks like hair across this creature is actually fibers of collagen.
Marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger says that collagen, a protein that provides structure to skin, bones, and tendons, is the biggest clue.
When components of the body begin to break down, the collagen begins to emerge. And because collagen doesn't break down as quickly as other tissues, these globsters can start to take on a hairy appearance that you wouldn't expect or be able to explain if you weren't familiar.
So what was this before the sea decomposed it into a globster?
This is actually pretty typical of what I would expect to see in regards to the carcass of a large whale. You can see some striations on the bottom of this object, and that is what we would expect to see in the mouth cavity of a large whale, such as a blue whale.
And Conger should know. As you can see, she's been up close and personal with globsters herself.
To witness firsthand one of these animals at close distance, to the human mind is almost unsurmountable. You're looking at the scale of an animal that's bigger than anything that's ever lived on the planet. And so to unpracticed eyes, they seem absolutely impossible.
Ultimately, this story is about the power of the sea. In this case, its power to transform the bodies of dead animals into something unrecognizable. And once that hair was explained to us, it became clear. Our verdict, the globster is not the kraken or a sea monster. It's a dead whale. November 7th, 2019, Miao Village in Kunming, China. A visitor is wandering through a park near Kuei Lake when she takes this video.
这个鱼已经成精了，有人的样貌。
The footage shows a fish, but there's something more here. There are two dark dots that look like human eyes, two vertical lines which resemble the sides of a nose, and one horizontal one underneath where a man's mouth would be. It's uncanny. Take another look as we zoom in.
What I'm seeing is obviously a large fish, but as it swims closer to the camera, it appears to have a human-like face, where you can actually make out what appear to be eyes, a pronounced nose. This is really creepy and disturbing.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt speaks of this fish's resemblance to a local legend.
Dragon's Gate represents one of the most famous Chinese legends. The story describes a carp in China's Yangtze River, which began to swim upstream, slowly mutating as it went. And when this carp finally reached the head of the Yangtze River, the gods rewarded it by transforming it into a golden dragon. In modern depictions of Chinese dragons, we often see these large scales, which is almost a tribute to this carp fish. Perhaps this carp or this koi type of fish is in the process of transforming into one of these golden dragons.
Gerhardt explores another possibility, that this creature could be the result of covert government activity.
There have been many theories that China have been conducting experimentation with marine animals. You have examples of porpoises and seals that have been trained for military use. Perhaps they are somehow trying to manipulate the genetic makeup of different types of aquatic animals.
Is this ringing any bells? It certainly reminded our team of something, the human-faced shark we previously investigated. We decided that was a birth defect caused by pollution in the ocean. So what exactly is going on in the waters of China? We'll turn it over to our experts to decide. Biologist Dr. Floyd Hayes mulls the theory that the Chinese government might be trying to mutate fish with other species. There have been cases of fish undergoing gene editing techniques that resulted in the development of limbs with bones, joints, and musculature. But Hayes says the morphology of this fish, particularly the dorsal spines and the large, thick scales, are in line with what we'd expect from a normal carp.
I haven't seen any evidence that it has been mutated with any kind of other animal, such as a reptile or a mammal.
Next, marine biologist Dr. Shay Conger weighs in on how the fish got this way. She compares the phenomenon in this video to our previous case involving that bizarre shark.
The human-faced shark had really severe developmental defects. What I see here doesn't seem to have any structural issues. Because fish hatch from eggs, it really is survival of the fittest. And for an animal to get this size, it would have to be very healthy. And what we see here are really distinct markings, but I don't see anything biologically wrong with this fish. What we see appears to be a really healthy live carp.
We always have to consider the phenomenon of pareidolia, the tendency of the human brain to perceive meaningful images, especially faces, and random objects like clouds and even electrical outlets. But Conger says this isn't just our minds playing tricks on us. The key here is that the carp is known as a plastic species, with a marked tendency to produce varieties and races in response to selective breeding and environmental influences. Conger says those markings are no coincidence.
There have been other cases of carp that looked like a human face. Having markings is a really common technique that we call mimicry.
And why would a fish want to look like a human? It's all about survival of the fittest.
Having marks that look like eyes is a really disconcerting thing for a predator, because in that split second where the predator has to decide if it's going to go after a prey item or not, having something that causes a little bit of uncertainty is advantageous.
Our verdict? Adaptive marking patterns. Yes! This species of carp has developed these strange features over time to help it survive in its environment. And this specimen just happens to be exceptionally well adapted. August 10th, 2019, in Thames, United Kingdom, a small seaside town in northeast England. A local man enjoys a morning coffee on a pier overlooking the water when he spots this. We see a creature in the water, dark, skinny, and wiry, of indeterminate length. It lurks just beneath the surface in the shallows, hovering in place and almost submerged. But then it breaks the surface and reveals a long, smooth body. Its shape is reminiscent of a snake, and then it goes back under and disappears. Field researcher Ken Gerhardt helps make sense of what we just saw.
What's exciting is that I can't readily identify what type of animal this is. One intriguing possibility is that there could be a form of quote-unquote underwater alien. And this is borne by an ex-Ocean X researcher who does underwater exploration, who claims to have encountered alien-like creatures in the ocean that he described as hyper-advanced. But physiologically speaking, he said that they somewhat resembled stingrays or manta rays with wing-like appendages.
Next, Gerhard wonders if this might be a saltwater cousin of a local freshwater legend.
Still others have hypothesized that this could be Bow Nessie, which is England's most famous aquatic denizen. Bow Nessie has been reported from Lake Windermere, the largest lake in England. It's described like a serpentine animal, but very large. Reports of Bow Nessie only date back to about 2010 or so, when it was first observed by a reporter. And since that time, there have only been about 10 sightings or accounts of Bow Nessie. But still, we have to recognize that there is a long history of lake monsters throughout the British Isles.
Bow Nessie, like its legendary cousin, the Loch Ness Monster, is thought by many to be a plesiosaurus, which were believed to live exclusively in the oceans. Until July 28, 2022, when an international team of researchers discovered plesiosaur fossils in ancient freshwater riverbeds in Morocco. So is it possible that a plesiosaur could be making its way from Lake Windermere to the ocean? In addition to aliens that resemble stingrays, underwater photographer Luis Lamar has described giant underwater spiders and poisoned deepwater sea snakes with bright yellow heads. Such figures are referred to as USOs, or unidentified submerged objects. Could this be one of the alien creatures from Lamar's accounts? Let's ask our experts.
Wildlife biologist Stephanie Shuttler weighs the possibility that we're looking at one of Britain's famed water monsters.
People think that this is Bone Nessie or some type of lake monster by the way that it's moving. It seems to be going in and out of the water, and these things fit what a lake monster would look like.
But Shuttler's more skeptical.
I wouldn't say it's really characteristic of an animal. Usually animals move faster, especially at the end. They don't bob up and down like that. When the end parts of it come up and down, they look like 90-degree edges, and I can't think of any animal that fits that description.
Next, marine biologist Shay Conger discusses the possibility that this is a creature from another planet.
It's been conjectured based on some witnesses that this might be an extraterrestrial, but this to me looks like a really normal object. It's in pretty shallow water, so it doesn't seem like there's anything particularly mysterious about it. It does seem like it's moving pretty dynamically in the water, and that could either point to the fact that this is something that's alive, or it's just something that's really flexible and catching the incoming tide and currents as they come in. Based on the fact that this object is not really making any advanced or directed movements, I can pretty much rule out that this is some kind of alien or extraterrestrial creature.
But even though she doesn't believe this figure's an alien, Conger still thinks the evidence points towards something strange and unexpected.
It's not navigating its environment, it's just waving a lot. Hydrologically, if this were an animal, you would see something like a wake or disturbance at the surface. So because of that, I don't think this is a living, self-propelled item. I believe this is probably some sort of plastic or other type of debris that's being moved around in the water.
Conger points out that more than 10 million tons of plastic waste enter the oceans each year, and between the angular shape of the object, the lack of a wake, and its dark reflective nature, all signs point to this being a large piece of plastic floating in the current.
The verdict? This is just some floating debris. We didn't spot Bone Nessie this time, but rest assured, we will keep a keen eye out for more sightings in Thailand. It's on everybody's top 5 list of legendary creatures, the Loch Ness Monster. Sightings date back to the 6th century. And just when you think the creature and the legend may have died down, some new eyewitness accounts pop up to remind you the story is still very much alive. This is Loch Ness, a mist-shrouded lake in the Scottish Highlands. Its waters a murky black ink, dark enough to hide one of the most iconic and elusive beasts of all time.
I thought I'd seen it all in Loch Ness, but this is just something I've seen that I can't explain, so.
It's July 2020. Firefighter and lifelong Loch Ness resident Ross McCauley is overlooking the water from the shore when he records this.
It's 12 feet long, about 4 feet wide, grey in colour. It seemed to be moving into the waves against the wind, occasionally breaking the surface.
Take another look. The image is hard to see, so let's zoom in, slow it down, and outline the figure in the water. And Ross's sighting isn't the only recent one of its kind. In September 2019, Stephen Chalice is on vacation when he snaps this unbelievable photo.
I'm guessing that what I saw was 8 foot long, but there might have been a bit more either end of that underneath the water, so you could be still talking about a fish that was 10, 12 feet long.
Whatever this is, it's massive.
Field researcher Ken Gerhardt is one of the world's foremost experts on mysterious creatures and is writing a book on Loch Ness. He has spoken to hundreds of eyewitnesses who swear Nessie exists.
The descriptions are very consistent, and this leads me to believe that, yes, in fact, there is a population of remarkable, immense animals in Loch Ness.
So are these just big fish stories or something more? We turn these amazing images over to our team of analysts to see if they would hold up under scrutiny. Our marine biologist, Dr. Shay Conger, begins her evaluation with the photos taken by Stephen Chalice.
Could we be looking at some kind of fish? Conger says no.
It's emerging pretty prominently from the water, and you don't see any protruding fins.
Conger concludes that it must be some sort of massive marine mammal. But upon closer examination, she notices something else that seems a bit fishy.
When I look at this image, I see a couple of red flags. If an object or animal is submerged in water, we would see a series of eddies and ripples around the entirety of this animal, extending out pretty far. Instead, what we see are a series of regular waves surrounding this animal and a small trailing wake behind it.
Based on those suspicions, we turn the photos over to our forensic video analyst, Michael Primo.
I performed what's called a smart report of the digital image that was provided, and it reported inconsistencies with the digital information. So in layman's terms, the picture of the alleged Loch Ness Monster is not an authentic image.
But what about the Macaulay video? We have no reason to believe it's a hoax.
It's a pretty calm day, which means that whatever's on the surface of the water is not a wave or other associated item. I can say that there is probably a large object here.
So what is it? Conger says she can also rule out a log or any other inanimate object, but she does have a theory.
A recent study utilizing eDNA was able to identify that there are in fact eel species within this lake. It's possible that some of these species could be large, however, they are as of yet undefined.
So we have a split decision this time. The unbelievable photos of the Loch Ness Monster are exactly that, unbelievable. The wave motion of the wake was the decider. As for the video, we think it's real, and we think it's an eel. Still, sociobiologists believe that because of our history as a prey species, humans will always be fascinated by stories of animals big enough to eat us.